Story 1. I've been a believer in the paranormal for as long as I can remember. This story begins when I was fairly young, around 5 or 6. This is house number 1. I remember having an incredibly powerful fear of the dark, and thus slept in my mum's room or my sister's room. When I tried to sleep in my own room, I would be overcome with absolute fear and terror. I remember having visions of things in my room, such as countdowns in the form of a stoplight. It started at green, slowly changed to yellow, and something inside me was telling me that something terrible would happen if it hit red. I remember being paralyzed in my bed and screaming for my mother to come rescue me. My mother tells me that I used to say that there was an old man who was at the end of my bed. When I think of this, I have a brief flash of a bald old man on the end of my bed in that room, so perhaps this is real or simply a construction of my matured imagination. We stayed at this house for a few years and left. The second house is perhaps the biggest reason why I'm a believer in the paranormal. House number 2. The Victorian Home. This was a 2-story Victorian age house with an attic, equipped with a trapdoor on the roof that let outside, so we moved in when I was 7 or 8 and didn't stay very long. I'll recount my own experiences first. The first thing I remember is hearing voices. I had my own room, which I rarely slept in because of the fear, which had become even worse, and this was right beside the stairs. I was really into TV, and we had our TV sent out for repairs for a while. During this time, things happened that I still can't explain. I would be laying in bed, wishing that we had our TV back, and then I would hear what sounded like voices downstairs. Thinking that it was the TV and that my parents had surprised me, I ran downstairs, only to find a dark and empty living room. The voices had stopped. It was not my parents or sisters. This happened several times, all in the middle of the night. I have no idea why I thought this could have been the TV. Next came the craziest paranormal experience I have ever had. We were all in my mother's room, 2 sisters and myself, including my mother, during a thunderstorm. We were scared and all slept in the same room. Her room is right across from the attic door, which is built into the wall rather than the ceiling. We had left the bedroom door open, so we're all laying there, and suddenly we hear something smash against the inside of the door. Whatever it was big. It continued to bang on the door as if it was trying to get out. We were frozen with fear, including my mother. There was no possible way to get into the attic from the outside unless you scale the house and break in through the window or break down the trapdoor I mentioned earlier. So we all laid there as whatever this thing was hammered at the door. Eventually, it just stopped, and my next memory was waking up in the morning. We went upstairs to investigate and found nothing. No footprints, no sign of forced entry. Literally nothing was touched. This floored us. Years later, I heard a story about how some owners, a long time ago, had kept their autistic son in the attic when he misbehaved. I've seen autistic children grow up to be fairly large, so perhaps this is some kind of connection. Either way, it scared me to the core. The rest are from my mother. She says that I used to wake up screaming in the middle of the night and would claim that there were faces in the walls. She claims that there was a hostile entity in the house whom she referred to as an old stern lady wearing a black Victorian dress, who was a woman who once lived there. Her room was the room that was later to be my room. My mother would hear someone playing violin that would cease as soon as she said something, and even saw a rocking chair moving on its own. She had a priest come in, not Catholic, who attempted to bless the house, but stuff still happened, so we moved in with my grandparents eventually. House number 3. The last house. This is the last house that I've been experiencing anything paranormal in. Again, my fear of the dark restricted me from sleeping in my own room, so I slept with my parents. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and hearing someone stomping around in boots. Both my parents were with me. I once heard claws on linoleum. There was a neighbour's dog who frequented our home, but I'm not sure if she ever got in on her own. We had a Finding Nemo toy that would laugh when you pressed its fin. It went off at night by itself. I once woke up in the middle of the night for no reason, only to have something slam into my door from the outside. When I investigated, there was nothing. Also, I once thought that there was a figure in our living room, but I'm skeptical of this memory. Other things include feelings of not being alone, or of being watched by something. I also began listening to music or audiobooks and television at night, in hopes to shut out the noises. It's been a long time since anything happened, although there are some strange things that have been happening lately at night in the form of visual oddities. As far as I know, I don't have any kind of hallucinatory diseases or anything like that. I'm 21 now, and I've only ever dabbled with pot, no psychedelics. Things that come to mind are seeing what seems like some kind of disembodiment light or fog or mist that moved on its own, and dots of light with no logical origin. I woke up in fright after it felt like something grabbed my leg. This could have been my girlfriend moving in her sleep and laying her foot over top of mine. As you see, I'm always trying to find the most logical explanation just in case. There was one other thing, but I can't really remember, so I won't try to explain it. Story 2. The following story is told from the perspective of a female. This is about my old bedroom where I grew up, and living at my parents' house. I always felt like there was something creepy about my closet, but also just felt like it was just from reading too many scary stories or something. I just got bad vibes. Also, I've had a friend over who said she felt something in there without me saying anything about it first. My sister said the same thing, just that it really creeped her out in there. When I was a teenager, I went through some insanely bad depression, always shutting myself in my room and crying for hours. I also became suicidal and tried killing myself in there, and would self-harm myself all the time. I would write in my journal every night to get those feelings out, and I'd store them hidden away in the closet. Maybe it was attracted to those dark feelings. So, as to why I think something is in there. After the depression subsided, I would start getting these terrible, gruesome nightmares only when I slept in that room. Like ones that would make me feel sick because of how messed up and gory and dark they were. Literally nauseous. I would wake up at night a lot thinking there was something watching me. Once I swear I saw a face in the darkness hovering above me. Another time, I awoke from a terrifying dream and I saw a dead body fall from the ceiling and almost hit me. But then it disappeared, so I figured I was still dreaming. Sometimes, I woke up to weird scratching on the walls for hours. I started getting sleep paralysis all the time, and I know most people see things when that happens, so it could just be chalked up to that. But I'd get it and almost feel like I was being possessed, couldn't move, and felt something in my head pushing me back into the darkness is the only way I can describe it. And I had to use all my force to fight it out. Also, I have woken up from sleeping on the couch to seeing a shadow dart around the living room, kind of giggling. So anyways, I moved out, and whenever I do go and stay at my parents' house, I get the nightmares again. Even though I don't sleep in that room anymore, The extra room is right next to that one. Last time, I woke up from a sleep paralysis dream where I dreamt that my guts exploded out of my stomach and this thing was ripping me apart. I never get dreams like this unless I'm staying there. And that's the weird part, I guess. Story 3. I've had a lot of experience with the paranormal since I was about 16 years old, and I'd like to share one of my more memorable experiences. When I was about 20, my dad, he was a mechanic, got me a GMC Jimmy. I'd never had a new car, and this was no different. I'm not sure how old it was because it was basically a mishmash of different SUVs. The glove compartment said it was a Bronco, but the frame said it was a GMC, and I assumed that it had been in some sort of accident if the frame and the inside were different. I asked my dad, but he said he got it in an auction, so he didn't really know the history of it. I drove it for a few weeks and had no problems. I thought it was pretty good for a beta SUV and took the time to clean it inside and out. After a few weeks, I remember driving home from one of my jobs. I worked at a Starbucks and was a lifeguard at a few different pools, and looked in the rearview mirror. I saw a kid, maybe about 7 or 8 years old, with bright orange hair in a bowl cut sitting right behind me in the centre of the back seat. He was smiling, and he had a small gap in between his teeth. I turned around to look, and he wasn't there. I turned back around to look at the rearview mirror, and it fell off. I pulled over because it was on the highway and looked around, but didn't see anyone. I tried sticking the mirror back up, but it wouldn't stay. I ended up going to get some glue for the rearview mirror at an auto parts store right after, but no matter what I did, it wouldn't stick back on. I told my dad it had fallen off, and he finally got it to stay on after messing with it for a while. I was understandably wary after that, and kept checking behind me periodically in the rearview mirror. But nothing happened for a few days. One afternoon I was driving home from lifeguarding, and my driver's side window just fell into the door. I told my dad, and he fixed it. And even though at that point I was uncomfortable driving the SUV because of what I had seen, I figured maybe it would have had some problems since it was older, so I didn't associate the kid with the problems. My dad fixed the window, but the next night I was driving home around 11 p.m, after lifeguarding, and my gas pedal fell off. I almost wrecked the SUV because it had happened just as I was passing some construction, and the lane had shifted due to a path made by road cones. There was a police car behind me, and they pulled me over, probably thinking I was drunk. When they came up to my window, they saw me and asked what had happened. I showed them the gas pedal, and they kind of laughed and told me to get it fixed. I told my dad what had happened when I got home, and he said that even though the SUV was kind of old, it shouldn't be falling apart like it was. I didn't tell him about the kid I saw, because I kind of felt like maybe he wouldn't believe me. About a week later, I was driving down the highway to get to work, and the brakes wouldn't work. I pressed down, but nothing happened. I was pretty freaked out, but just let off the gas and steered the SUV to the side of the road. I got it stopped, then walked to a payphone to call my dad. He got there and checked the brake line, and said there was no brake fluid in it. At that point I was done. In my mind, even if it had nothing to do with that kid, I felt like it was too unsafe to drive. My dad replaced the brakes and the brake system, and drove it for a week or so, told me he had no problems with anything, and said it would be okay to drive. So even though I didn't want to, I drove it to work. The brakes failed again. It was the same thing. I got my dad to look at the brakes, and he said the brake fluid was completely gone. At that point, he said he didn't want me driving it because he was afraid I'd get into an accident. We parked it at our house and let it sit there for a couple of days. My dad said he was going to talk it over with his friend who was also a mechanic and decide what to do with it. After a couple of days, I was sitting in our kitchen eating lunch and my dad and brother walked in the house. My brother asked my dad if he'd ever seen a kid with red hair in the SUV. And my dad said, "With a bowl cut." And I was so surprised, and I just looked at them and said, "Yeah, he's about 7 or 8 years old." We all talked about what we had seen, and my dad figured that maybe a kid had died in the SUV, and that was why we'd all seen him at some point. We had all seen the kid in the same spot, in the centre of the back seat, smiling. We'd all seen him at a glance, but when we looked back, he was gone. My dad had seen him when he was driving the SUV around after the brakes had failed the first time, and my brother had seen him when he was walking by the SUV to come inside the house. My dad never said anything, but I think maybe after we talked, he thought all the weird stuff that had happened in the SUV had something to do with that kid. I told my friend who worked at Starbucks, and she said she wanted to see the SUV. My friend has had a lot of experiences with the paranormal too, so I figured she'd be able to see the kid if he was there. We had spent the day at her house, so we went over there about 11:30 p.m. She pulled into our neighbour's driveway across the street so we could watch the SUV. We didn't see anything, so we just sat there, talking about what had happened with the SUV. I remember not looking at the SUV the whole time, because I just felt uneasy looking at it. We both looked at the SUV at the same time at one point, and we both saw the kid sitting in the back seat, right in the centre. It's so surreal to think about it now, but it was just as surreal back then. I thought it was a person just sitting there because the headlights on my friend's car were shining off the back of the kid's neck. He wasn't moving or anything, just staring straight ahead. I felt like I couldn't move, like I was paralysed. And then the kid's head started to turn to the right, and my friend peeled out of there. I remember my head hitting the headrest. She hit the gas so hard. We didn't really talk about what happened, I guess because it was so scary and it's just not one of those things you want to discuss. You just want to forget it ever happened. I stayed at my friend's house until my dad came back from Florida. When my dad came back, I told him what my friend and I had seen, and he needed to get rid of the SUV. I just didn't want to have anything to do with it after that. I never did find anything in the news about a kid with orange or red hair who was about 6 or 7 years old and had been in an accident. I'm not sure who my dad gave the SUV to, and I never asked. Story 4. After being a materialist my whole life, these last 2 years have been a weird ride. 2 years ago, I had my first spiritual experience that opened my mind to more than just the physical existing in our reality. Synchronicity has followed me since then, often being communicative about something when I need it, it seems. Then a few months ago, I had my first out-of-body experience, which frightened me quite a bit since I have never tried to have one and didn't really understand what was happening. I moved into a new apartment in late September. These are the 3 things that have happened there. One of the first nights there, not counting this as one of the 3 odd things in my OP title, I had a second out-of-body experience. I was resting on my couch, and I must have fallen asleep. I found myself paralysed but conscious, and began floating up to the ceiling on my back. I tried to stay calm and to think of it as a good, interesting thing, but once I got to the ceiling, I woke up back in my body and on the couch. Anyway, all of this stuff has really been challenging what I hold to be true. But 3 things have happened in this new apartment that I can't explain. The first was a sleep paralysis episode I had in bed. I woke up paralyzed within my body, sleeping on my side, facing the wall on one side of my bedroom. Out of my close peripheral vision, I could see the silhouette of a man in a brimmed hat in the corner that made my bed frame and the wall. I tried to look at him, but couldn't make out any detail. I could see little bits of yellow or gold though. I could make out some indistinct chatter, but couldn't or didn't want to focus on what was being said. I thought it might have been about me. I could feel the presence of something behind me, in bed with me, just on the other side of my body. I thought for some reason that it would be non-human looking or grotesque in some way. I just felt like I knew that if I could see it, it would frighten me. I didn't feel negativity from the presence. I just knew it would be really horrifying to see for me. So, for a moment, I tried to look forward and ignore both presences. But then I thought about it. I'm a religious fellow, since my first spiritual experience, and I had this thought that if I am right with God, what in this universe can be threatening to me? Followed by, if this thing is looking at me and can see what I look like, despite me not looking like it at all, then isn't it fair that I should look at it and know what it looks like? It's a difference, not necessarily a threat. I decided that I wanted to know what was sharing my bed with me, so I struggled to try and turn around, and after some serious effort, I began to be able to turn my perception around slowly. My body was not moving, but I think my whatever travels out of body was turning. As I'm turning, I hear from behind me the presence, an amused and sort of affectionate, "He's brave, isn't he?" Followed by the silhouette in the hat agreeing. Then I woke up. I was vibrating and there was a loud ringing in my ears. Much more mundane, but actually more bizarre to me, I brought a woman back to my apartment a couple of months ago, and as we're getting into bed, she decides to take her earrings off. She takes the first off and it falls out of her hands onto the floor. We both hear it fall. Now, I had just moved in there. All that's in my room is a bed on a frame. But there's no under my bed. The frame sits right on the floor. There's a couple of lamps, but nowhere for this earring to hide. We check all over the floor, all in the bed, all in the sheets. Nothing. Earring is gone. The girl decides to go and put the other one somewhere safe and goes and puts it on my kitchen counter. The next morning, we still can't find the earring, and the earring she thought she put on the counter is MIA as well. I promise to text her if I find them. A few weeks go by, and then one morning they're both sitting on my kitchen counter. Go figure. Just a couple of weeks ago, I'm watching TV on my couch. There's a table between me and the couch, and I put a nearly full bag of Skittles on the table. I'd eaten a few, and was done for a while. At some point while watching TV, the Skittle bag, bigger than the single double serving bags that you get at the movies, this was like for home eating over weeks, goes flying off the centre of the table onto the floor, but with a sound like it had been slapped off the table. That's exactly what it looked like someone was walking by and just slapped the Skittle bag right off the table. They practically exploded, Skittles everywhere. The bag landed yards away on the floor. Just some weirdness I wanted to share. No idea what to make of any of it. It's just curious oddness. Story 5. When I was about 5 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night because I had to pee. As I was waking up, I felt unusually cold. I thought this was weird and it felt wrong, so I decided not to move yet. I don't know why, but it felt like I was being watched. I felt a breeze in my room which was weird, and as I listened I could hear the trees outside. The only way I'd be able to hear the wind that clearly was if my window was open. My window was not supposed to be open. Not because I wasn't allowed to open it, but because it literally shouldn't have been able to be opened. I know this is a huge fire hazard, but my dad screwed the window shut because a few houses down the road had been broken into, so there was no way it could have been opened. I was very afraid, and I had to pee so badly it felt like my bladder was on fire. I didn't want to move or open my eyes. I was silently hoping one of my parents would wake up and turn on the hall light. Then I felt 2 fingers go down my back like when you use a hand to imitate walking. It went from my neck to my ankles. I felt my heart drop and instantly was hit with a wave of nausea. I couldn't hear anything but the wind in the trees, and whoever touched me only did it once. I strained to listen to any other noise other than the wind, but I couldn't hear anything. I wanted to scream for my mum and dad so badly, but I couldn't get up the courage to make even a whimper. I couldn't even open my eyes. I just laid there for what felt like hours, which it may have been, but I'm not sure. Then the hall light clicked on. I relaxed and remained fake sleeping until I could confirm it was my parents who had turned on the light. My mum walked into my room and whispered my name a few times before coming over to nudge me awake. I pretended to wake up and she asked if I had opened the window. I sat up and looked towards the foot of my bed. My window was open all the way, blinds up, with the screen missing. I was shocked and told my mum no, which was the truth. She went and got my dad immediately and I bolted to the bathroom to relieve myself. My parents checked every inch of the house to make sure there was no one hiding. At the time, I didn't realize the severity of the situation. After I finished in the bathroom, I was mostly concerned with the possibility of getting in trouble for the window being opened. My dad talked to me and asked how the window was opened, and I told him I didn't know. I woke up with it like that. I never told my parents about whoever touched my back, but the screws in the window were still in place. But the window was open anyway. It was really weird, and I honestly don't believe someone broke in. There would have been a lot of noise, and I'm a pretty light sleeper, and so are my parents. I don't know what really happened, but it was really creepy. Story 6. Over the last month, at least 4 times, I woke up randomly in the middle of the night to the sound of someone whispering in my apartment. First time I heard it, I jumped out of my bed and ran into my kitchen to see who it was. No one was in there. I smoke weed, so after that experience I've just thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. 2 weeks ago, I started dating someone. Last night she spent the night and for the first time I left her at my apartment, after I left for work. She was just joking about how my apartment creeped her out this morning because she woke up to what sounded like someone whispering to her. I've said nothing to her about hearing something similar. Obviously, I'm not going to tell her I've been hearing shit too, but I'm freaking out now. Should I be concerned? Is this normal paranormal stuff? Is there something I can or should do? If it's not something paranormal, then what the fuck could it be? The weird thing is, I've lived in this place for over 2 years, and I've had nothing like this happen before. Until recently. Story 7. My brother died when I was around 2.5. My sister was only 6 months old when it happened. I have very vivid and accurate memories from that age. At that age, I used to believe that I saw him, my deceased aunt, and my deceased grandfather as transparent people, and my parents would sometimes ask, "Who are you waving at?" when I would wave at the sky, where I thought I could see them. When my mother would give me nap time at 3 years old, I would think that I could see my transparent brother, and we would play together. One time, I prayed to God in every corner of the room for my brother to come and see me, and I saw him appear in full colour. I ran from the room and told my mother that I saw him, in all his colours. I know now, as an adult, that this was a childhood fantasy. I didn't have the coping mechanisms to really grasp death and wanted desperately to believe in an afterlife. I've long since grown out of that. Still, that doesn't change some of the objective phenomenon that we experienced. My parents experienced many strange things when I was very young. They told me that a very large brass candlestick tipped itself on its edge and dragged itself across the piano. There is still a large scratch on that old piano that they claim was the self-moving candlestick. They never knew what caused it. Another time they were sitting in the living room and a large glowing fiery orb floated through the wall, hovered for a second, and then floated back out. They called this ball lightning. When I would come home from the library or wherever, I would often find that things were not where I left them. My toys were often moved. I figured that it was due to my mother cleaning and straightening up the house. One day it struck me that my mother was with me and my baby sister when I was out of the house, and my father was at work. So, I set up an experiment. I had a collection of paperweights that my father would give me. He would get them for free at trade conventions and the like, and then give them to me since he had no use for them. 3 of them were shaped like bricks. I stacked the bricks up and had the feeling that whatever was moving these things was going to move them while I was out with my family that day. Nobody else was in the house when I returned. The paperweights were unstacked and sitting next to each other. I was very proud of my little self for accurately predicting that, and for having conducted a successful experiment. As a kid, I attributed this to my brother's spirit, or fairies, or my stuffed animals coming to life and moving things around. I haven't believed in such things since then, and that was long ago. But when I read through paranormal Reddit posts, I think back to those events and wonder what really happened. Thank you for watching and or listening to this video. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and hit the like button. I aim to release one 30-minute video every 2 to 3 weeks, so if you like my channel, go ahead and subscribe to keep up to date with all of my uploads. The links in the description to this video include all the people who contribute to the content. You'll also see links to my Twitter account, so go ahead and follow those to keep up to date with everything I'm working on. To all of my current subscribers, thank you again for your continued support and your wonderful comments. Thanks again for watching.